love talking with the coaches around esports to get their philosophies and thoughts on how they drive their particular players to success. And success is the right word to use here, as we have the what many would now call, if they weren't already, they definitely cemented it this past weekend, the best Valorant team in the world. TSM knocking down the first major tournament since the game's global launch in the T1 Nerd Street Gamers Valorant Showdown. They made it look easy much of the tournament, and here to break it all down is their coach, Taylor, joining us from Los Angeles, California. Taylor, thanks for joining us. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to break down the tournament. We're going to talk all about it. The first thing I want to start on, though, is we just got news this morning, a little bit more color in terms of how Valorant will be updated in the months and years to come. I'm very curious, when you heard this news that we heard from Valorant themselves, 6 agents a year is the plan. 6 new agents a year. I'm wondering, you as a coach, when you first heard this news and how frequently we're going to get new agents and new updates in the game, how do you process that as a coach? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of people's first thought would be to be worried about that amount of agents, just because it can cause balance issues. But this is also Riot, who's been balancing characters in League for however many years, and they're still a top esport. And there's games like Overwatch with like 25 or 30 characters, and Rainbow Six has a ton. So I think balancing is possible. It might bring up interesting parts of Riot's plan in the future where they're introducing character bans and stuff. So really it's all just kind of up in the air. I don't know until they actually release the characters. I won't know how to intercept and handle them. They all might be worse than our current lineup right now. We might just keep using the current ones. But so far, all the characters have been pretty balanced.
So what do you have a number in mind? Is there even a magic number in mind where you would want to see a picks and bans system in Valorant? I mean, we're still too low now, but at what point do you say this is something we should really be considering?
I don't know if there's a magic number. I guess if you could possibly do it just adding, an additional 6. So after a year, I don't think it would be crazy to think that you could pick or ban certain characters, as long as it's like singular bans or 2 bans or something. But I think the issue they're going to run into is people are just going to ban the same champions. Like everyone's going to ban Cypher or Sage right now. And I don't think those 2 characters are going anywhere anytime soon unless they get some kind of nerf.
We encourage you to give your questions as well, whether they are in chat or on Twitter. I have some questions collected. We'll ask them a little bit later on. But let's talk about the tournament this past weekend. TSM just looked like a complete team. I mean, they have for a while. The success speaks for itself, particularly in the closed beta, and it was much of the same here. When you look back at the tournament this weekend, how proud are you of the team? What were your big takeaways from your players this weekend?
I'm really proud. I think the players have really trusted in the process we've been going through of trying to create our own meta in the game. We're truly trying to stay ahead of what everyone's doing, and sometimes it feels like, we don't know if this is the right answer because we don't have anything to look to. When we played Counter-Strike, we could look to people like Astralis and Liquid and Navi, and you can copy a lot of what they're doing and adapt it to your own play style. But in this game, it's like, well, let's try this comp to counter something, and we'll see if it works. And luckily, we're putting in the effort to make stuff work and test, and I'm really happy with their performance. I think in the past few tournaments, we've only dropped 2 maps. One of them was a blowout. We got dumped on by FNS's team during the event, but no series losses or anything, no lower brackets for us. Feels really good.
What teams impressed you? You guys had You guys saw T1 twice, obviously, winners final, then the grand final. There were some moments where some teams got some good rounds against TSM, but from your lens, which teams really impressed you in this tournament?
Yeah, I can't say T1 impressed us because we were expecting a tough fight versus them. But once we were able to adapt to what they were doing, it was pretty straightforward. I think FaZe was obviously the standout group coming into the tournament. No one really expected anything from them because they've only been playing together for like a week. And I'm not even sure it's their full lineup because I know they've also picked up Jason R. But yeah, I think FaZe is probably the most impressive. Corey seems like a really well-rounded player. But I'm mostly impressed with my guys and how well they kept their heads in the game. So I'm really happy with our performance. I wasn't really worried about how anyone else was going to play. I just wanted to make sure that we could bring what we've been doing in scrims to matches, and we did that.
You mentioned about trying to figure out comps and metas and even creating your own. One thing that TSM did throughout the tournament was a sageless comp on Ascent. And a lot of teams did use Sage on Ascent. Take me through that. When did you guys start thinking about that, implementing that? How did that happen, and why did you stick with it?
Well, everyone has this core of Brimstone, Sage, and Cypher, right? Which means that we only have 2 characters to put onto Drone and Wardell, because Cutler, Hazed, and Sabrosa are those core utility characters. Drone is obviously having a really good time with Phoenix, and Phoenix is really strong. I think he's underutilized, especially on these aggressive players like Drone. But that means that if we wanted a Sage in a comp that also had Jet or Sova, we'd have to force Matt to play Cypher or Cypher or Omen or something. And on Ascent, we really wanted to try to have 2 smokers available, so Omen and Brimstone. In order to do that, we had to drop one of those core people, and Sage was the most likely one. Cypher's still really strong. Sage is extremely strong too, but we thought on T side we would get the advantage by having double smokes. So we've been practicing that for a few weeks. Sage is still super essential on maps like Split. I think you're crazy if you don't run a Sage in mid. But yeah, on Ascent it works out. You don't need it, and her healing ability is like, it's just not what it was. I mean, Sage is basically a self healer now because she can heal max 3 times in a round, and that's if you hit your heal at the beginning of the round, the middle, and the end. So.
In your opinion, should the next agent be another healer?
No, I hate healers.
Oh, you hate
I hate heal. I don't like healing agents at all. I never liked them in Overwatch. They make it overly complex to know like what you can do off your default if you've done damage to someone, and not in a good way. It's more just like an annoying. It's just a nuisance. Like you use utility to get this advantage. Like, hey, I've used my Raise Nade and I've done damage to a player. We can abuse that somehow, and now we can't abuse it. So it's just a waste of time. So I don't like healers. I don't want any more healers. Yeah, I hope not. I think someone asked me the other day what an interesting character would be. I think a new character that would be interesting would be someone who can cut the utility of another team. So if you imagine someone with a grenade that could like suck up smokes or a part of a sage wall or something instantly, I think that would be interesting. Or like cut a piece out of a brim ult so you can plant or something.
Oh yeah, to be able to hack or mess with people's abilities and ultimates.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to not introduce like another damage character or someone who's just going to get in your way. It's kind of a way to cut through some of the heavy utility usage that we're seeing now.
So the explanation there about the double smokes and the long sight lines on Ascent leads into a question from Van Silly, who was actually one of the commentators on the event this past weekend, did a fantastic job. What is your opinion, Tailored, on the debate for two ops being too boring to play against on attack?
Yeah, I think so. This is like the big debate right now. Well, first off, hi, Vansili. I love Vansili. Um, I think people don't actually want to nerf the op. I think they want to nerf Wardell. You know, and Wardell was like super selfish this weekend because every time someone was in his crosshair, he killed them. He never let any of his teammates get any kills, except for drone on a few maps, and that's just greedy. I think he just wanted to have articles written about him. But
He wanted all the attention to himself. Maybe the MVP got an AMG class vehicle. That's why he was working so hard.
yeah, he's outside in it right now. I think people said this in Counter-Strike too, that the op needs to be nerfed. Like it needs to be nerfed because it's too strong. But I think there's plenty of utility options. There's plenty of strategy options to deal with single, a double, a triple op. If someone triple ops on us, then that's the easiest game we've ever played. And I can shut that down every time. You just need a good understanding and good protocols for how to handle stuff like that. I mean, people run double ops against us a lot, and like I said, we've dropped 2 maps in the last 3-4 tournaments. So,
Take me through your role throughout the weekend. What is your communication like? How are you talking with the players? What are you evaluating? As much as you're willing to tell us, even from a structural, technical standpoint, what are you doing throughout a tournament weekend?
well, a lot of my job is done before the weekend. So the weeks leading up to it, I'm making sure the guys are prepared. I'm making sure that they have enough server time. Enough time off is really important too. For instance, this weekend we didn't really have a break. We didn't have a day off. So I ended up canceling a bunch of our scrims to have lighter days towards the end. It was funny. One of those days we actually ended up playing that phase lineup on the day before the tournament. So we actually got some insight into how they were going to play, which was helpful, which we didn't know that they were the phase lineup that was going to play before we scrimmed them. But during the tournament, it's mostly just making sure the guys are focused, making sure that they are communicating with each other each map, and that I'm communicating with them because I'm communicating while they're playing. You know, if I have insights or whatever, or if I want adjustments to be made that I think need to be made if we're down. So some of these maps, I don't need to do anything. You know, between Hayes and Sabrosa making calls, there's not a lot of adjustments that need to be made. But like CT side, I will sometimes I'll insist that like Cutler go on to C site on Ascent or on Haven just to switch it up or something. Or if I think that they're going to do something, I'll ask for the op to go somewhere. So I'm trying to have as minimal. I'm trying to be as minimally annoying as possible, but making adjustments where I see necessary.
So would it be akin to a corner person in between rounds in boxing and MMA, for example? So you're trying to be as succinct as possible in between rounds or in between maps?
Yeah, exactly. I think MMA is a good. I've always liked the MMA correlation between how a player approaches a fight, where you go into it with a strategy, but you also need to read an opponent. So I think I provide good insight on that read, and I also do all the prep work beforehand on the opponent. So we have a game plan, but we also have ways to adjust to it.
How did the tournament unfold from your perspective, from the player's perspective? Was it well executed? What were your overall impressions from the T1 tournament?
You mean as far as the tournament
Yeah, like how it
organization
was
stuff?
executed, behind the scenes, communication, basically everything that you went through throughout the weekend, results aside.
Yeah, it was good. I think a lot of tournaments are struggling right now to come up with a solid veto system because there's only 4 maps and no one has a clear rule set. You know, it's not like Counter-Strike where even in Counter-Strike different TOs have different rules. But I think T1 handled it really well. I was really happy with the viewership numbers. I think we hit 50K on the finals, and even in some of the group matches, we hit 50K. these orgs, T1, TSM, Cloud9, they all have a huge draw. So I think it's a really good idea for Riot to invest in these collaborations with these larger orgs and reach a broad audience.
It seems like that's sort of a formula that's starting between Immortals and T1 major org. And I'm not insinuating anything here. I'm just saying the pattern seems to be that major orgs are endeavoring to put on their own tournament. So it could be safe to say that every major org might at least have a conversation about it in the next 6 to 8 months or so.
Yeah, every org is definitely having that conversation. And I'm not sure what insight orgs have into Riot's future with the game as far as their control over it. Obviously, eventually, I think Riot will take control and have their own franchise league, but it's all kind of up in the air. And right now, we're just playing as many tournaments as we can, big or small.
This is a question going back to the actual gameplay in the tournament. This is from ZixQD in the chat. It says, question for Tailored. Are teams shying away in general from Bind due to the difficulty of executing onto sites? It seems like the least popular map, or at least down there with Split in the past couple tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't play Bind the entire tournament. Like I was saying before, Bind is not a map that we're uncomfortable on. It's just a map like in Dust 2, in Counter-Strike on Dust 2 or Mirage, that everyone has a general idea of how to play. So we don't want to give a 50-50 to a team when we could be going into a 70-30 if we can ban maps. It's not that Bind is a bad map. I do think it needs some adjustments. But no, it's like it's just more of a strategic thing. That's the map that we don't want to play because everyone else kind of knows how to play it.
What kind of adjustments would you make on Bind?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Yeah, I think people complain about maps a lot, but they don't know what map makers go through to try and come up with this stuff. I'm not sure, honestly. I think a lot of the choke points are so on Dust 2 and Counter-Strike you have the B tunnels, and coming out of those is almost like a death trap. So you almost never go B, and it almost feels like every exit into a bomb site on Bind is a B tunnel exit. So these narrow choke points make it too easy for CTs to burden you with utility and stuff. And then some of the ultimates are really annoying on that map, which ultimates are annoying in general, I think. But yeah, I would just open it up a bit more, let it breathe. Maybe increase rotation times for CTs.
A follow-up to that from Torpid1 in the chat says, what bugs or improvements do you think Riot needs to work on in the game ASAP? And I'm saying this aside from the observer mode. I think that's the biggest thing that people would love improvements on. But is there anything that you have noticed that you would love to see removed from the game or fixed?
Man, I would love a coaching mod. Not being able to properly coach is tough. Yeah, I would love to be in the server with the guys when they're actually playing. As far as improvements, I tweeted the other day, I thought that there's a case to be made for having an extended round timer, because 13 rounds to win is super unforgiving. So you can see, like in that last map in Ascent, we felt pretty in control of that whole map, but we still ended 13-9, which is a little close for comfort. So you have almost no rounds to adjust, and I think more tedious characters like Viper would see more playtime if the round timer is extended by 20 or even 15 seconds. You would see a lot of games go different ways if you just extended the round timer a little bit.
Take me through going back to how you evaluate your players and your coaching style. I think it's very easy for a lot of people to just look at combat score and KDA and make assumptions on how players are performing. But at your level, what are sort of the determinations that you're making when you evaluate your players from this weekend? Like, what goes into saying a player had a really good performance in a certain role, even if their KDA to some people might not reflect that, for example?
Yeah, I think it was Vin Scully, the broadcaster.
Yeah.
He said that statistics are like a drunk on a lamppost, how they only provide support and not illumination. So a lot of stats are good for up-and-coming players to evaluate their own performance. But I think from a coaching perspective, it's important to see how impactful each player is being, and you can only get that from watching the game. I don't think that Valorant or Counter-Strike or Overwatch, maybe the MOBAs are, but I don't think these games can be, money-balled like or a normal sport like baseball could, where baseball is so full of statistics, but these games are so complex and there's so much of a human factor that it's almost impossible to just look at stats and prepare for a match or assess what happened in a match. Someone who goes 5-15 could have been the most impactful player because you got you 5 important rounds or whatever. I mean, that's an extreme example, but you really need to watch the match and appreciate the impact that someone had on a round.
This question came from Esports Doug on Twitter. Sup, Doug? Appreciate you always. He directed me to a tweet from Pith, who's a professional Valorant player for G2. This is what he tweeted during the tournament. I'm sure you've seen this tweet already. Watching the T1 tournament to analyze how the NA teams play, and honestly, some things are innovative and good, but in general, I'm not that impressed with all the plays and decisions. Wish there was a way to get and watch demos of the other matches. What do you make of those comments? I know we haven't seen too much gameplay from EU, but what do you make of that sentiment regarding the NA scene and players and teams?
Yeah, I think I don't think he meant that in a malicious way. I do agree that we need a better way to watch demos and stuff. And I also think he made that tweet before any of our games had been streamed. So I hope he would change his tune after watching us. But, I'm happy to play him and his team anytime they want to play. That'd be great. I think once the scenes get established more and we do get those demo reviews, then it'll be much easier to see who has the strategic upper hand and who's relying on just skill and stuff. But yeah, I don't think he meant it maliciously or anything, and I agree with his overall point.
Let's talk about you and your coaching. When did you decide, I want to be a coach? I want to coach either CSGO or even, let's start there. When did you decide you just wanted to be a coach in esports?
I never really did decide. Growing up, I was never like a big sports guy. Like I watched MMA, I watched some boxing. I used to race cars.
Oh, wow.
I come from the auto industry, so I used to be a mechanic, and I would build race cars, and I raced in door slammer stock classes and stuff.
What do you make of iRacing and eNASCAR having a moment right now?
I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
I don't know a single thing about it.
Fair enough. It just seems like that's getting a lot of attention right now based on how realistic it looks compared to the real thing.
Yeah, I think something like that could be interesting because it could be so competitive. I mean, one driver against another could be a very interesting thing. You could see a lot of standout talent coming up in something like that.
But anyway, back to you.
I think I don't remember what the question was. Oh, what did I decide to become a coach? Yeah, I think I really got into the idea of doing interviews when I started working with Launders, and we started building the Boxer brand together. So we paid our own way to go to events and interview players, and that's how we started networking and talking to these people. I've known Drone. Drone was the first person I ever met in Counter-Strike. I met him in a pug. And we're literally only friends because both of our names are Taylor. And we just thought that was a funny coincidence. So yeah, he was on a team called Splice, and I said, if you guys ever need an analyst or whatever, would love to give you input. And luckily, the Splice coach Ely gave me a shot, which he didn't have to, and I had nothing to prove my track record. But I guess he liked the work I did, and I showed him. And from there, we went to Envy, and I became the manager on Envy, which is kind of the track I wanted to stay on. I thought managing a team would be more consistent career-wise and something I would be better at because I had a lot of managerial training and stuff from the auto industry.
Mm.
But then when NV let us go, I stepped in to just help out Orgless, and that was the Counter-Strike team that Wardell and Sabrosa were on, and I just liked doing it. I thought I could bring a lot to help them, and you feel more part of the team as the head coach than as an analyst or as a manager. So, once we stepped in, it's all just kind of happened. It's not really like active choices or anything, but I'm enjoying what I do. So
Just life happens, huh?
pretty much, yeah. I never growing up, I always hated, I never understood team sports. I wasn't like a competitive person or anything. And I still am not. I'm not like a high school baseball coach. I'm not going to yell at the guys. They're all adults. They know how to talk to each other. I try to stay patient with them because people can get angry and stuff. But we all know what the goal is. We want to win. And you can only win by winning rounds. And you only win rounds when you trust each other. So that's all I ask of the guys.
How do you keep your team motivated? I mean, we always see these stories, in esports or traditional sports, where success comes fast, success comes often, and then motivation starts to wane, or then problems start to set in, or whatever happens. So you as the coach, how do you mitigate this? How do you continue to keep your team motivated to push the envelope, to be the best and stay the best?
Yeah, well, I think every single one of us knows what losing feels like, and we know how awful it feels. I hate losing way more than I like winning. So it's just funny because I said I wasn't competitive, but I guess I am. So I think that we all know that now we have a real challenge ahead of us because people are going to be watching what we do, and people are going to be out for blood. We have the confidence behind us. Now we just need to focus on a goal, basically. So we just have a goal of continuing to expand the meta that we're trying to create and stay focused on winning events.
I'm going to end on this. You are currently the coach of what many people would consider to be, and rightfully so, the best team in the world in Valorant right now, today.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's still very early. Definitely the best team in North America. And we know in esports, very few titles have NA dominance in them, particularly Riot's other title, League of Legends, right? So what I want to ask is, I know it's early to ask this question, but from how you see it, how much of a foothold, how much of a impression will NA make as we go on, even 6, 8 year, 2 years from now? What will NA competition and how competitive the NA region is to the rest of the world? In your opinion, what will that look like?
Well, so far, it's a really good question, and ultimately, no one has the answer. But so far North America has really the biggest foothold is the amount of time that we've put into it. We all got the game early, especially my team. We all committed early. We were a team like a week into the beta. So that's months now that we've been playing. And a lot of these EU teams, they can't even figure out who they want to play with. A lot of NA teams are that way too. People keep cutting each other and they don't want to play with this person or that person, or they're only focused on getting an org first. And I think a lot of orgs made the mistake of trying to combine too many FPS people and trying to build a roster off of just talent. And that's going to negatively affect them in the long run. And I think it's going to negatively affect EU as well. I know Japan has the Jupiter lineup, which I watched, and they weren't doing anything really like out of the current meta that I saw. But someone's going to come along and do something wacky, and it's going to work, and they're going to shake things up at some point. I don't know where they're going to come from, though. But there's talent all over the world, so we'll see.
At least for today, right now, in June 2020, NA is the kings of Valorant. I think we can say that for right now.
Yep. Yeah. At least this weekend we were. No one could prove otherwise. So.
And TSM has certainly proved that. Another very impressive tournament win in the first big tournament since the global release of the game in early June. Continued success to TSM. Taylor, thank you very much for joining us here on Coach's Corner.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We're going to have you back. We were just really the tip of the iceberg here. But for all of you watching, thank you very much for joining us here on Coach's Corner. It's every single Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we pick the brain of a different coach around esports. This week it was tailored from TSM. TSM victorious in the first big Valorant tournament, the T1 invitation or the Showdown, and many more tournaments to come. And we'll be following it all along on our ESPN Esports Valorant show every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern right here. Thanks for watching. Good vibes. See you next week.